Welcome to Rapid Fire Manufacturing, live from Torrance, California, here with David Smith, CEO and President of Robinson Helicopter.
It's going good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having us.
Yeah.
Beautiful tour. So I really appreciate seeing everything. And as far as like companies being vertically integrated, sometimes that doesn't work. How have you seen that being really beneficial?
Yeah. I mean, I think from before my time here, they had a belief, one, that they couldn't accept suppliers that struggled to meet the quality requirements, the production rate requirements, sometimes even the cost requirements. And that led to a pretty strong culture of self-reliance. In the event that there was some fall down of a vendor, or we had one 30 years ago, and actually we just celebrated a bunch of the employees that came over when this happened, but a vendor had financial issues, and we picked up all those machinists and some of the equipment they had, and we're able to then insource some of our critical components. And, I think that's an example of how some companies fret about that and what happens if someone, struggles. We don't, because we think we can handle those things if they come our way. We've proven it. The most recent thing was our upholstery, and it was infrequent. It was the quality that was questionable in a struggling vendor, and all those things went away when we brought it inside, and the employees were happier. We were better performing, lower cost and better quality. Kind of hard to beat all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So being able to have a better control is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to control a outside supplier.
Yeah. Otherwise, you are at the limitations in aviation of your weakest link. It's you have to be really aggressive about not creating vulnerability.
Absolutely. Actually, that kind of goes into the next question too. Speaking of vulnerability, how does that play a role in leadership?
Yeah, I think, the actual character trait of vulnerability is pretty important. In engineering, we don't always know the answer. And a lot of times aircraft, like the ones we have flying behind us, have things you have to understand through experimental test. And so if you as a leader build an environment where you're vulnerable to feedback, vulnerable to the fact that you can't know everything, you can't be precise without having some tests to back up your assumptions or your beliefs, you walk into more things and actually invest in the right types of things, which is spend more time in testing, spend more time bringing things further forward in the schedule so that you can get the testing underway. That's certainly part of our new product strategy, is to make sure that we get into testing earlier and not limit ourselves to, a late schedule and a late test and then uncovering something that was unexpected.
And is this something you learned throughout your career?
Yeah, I think, even my earliest part of my career, you could tell that complex systems, complex products that have, in the end, a very specific mission that have to be accomplished, is a very complex set of equations you have to balance. And because of that, you can't know it all through analytical tools or pure 3D design. A lot of people will tell you that they can. It just isn't true. And I think in practice, it's better to build a fail fast and learn quickly than to build one that is falsely, both optimistic or falsely arrogant about the things that they know and they don't. So I think it's proven well. In my early career, we had lots of little problems that led to big problems from, people misidentifying things on drawings, small mistakes like that led to entire schedule delays of a big program. And I think when you get down to that level of literally leaving a couple of numbers off of a drawing led to a multi-month delay in a schedule of a critical defense program. That kind of stuff is just one example of a sea of examples that show you how complex these systems are to develop. And it can be difficult to manage that without building tolerance and understanding early that you're not going to be perfect all the way through.
Absolutely. And now, talking about your history, could you walk us through that? I know everyone has a different way they get into manufacturing. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. From my very earliest job, I worked 18 years at Textron, most of that in the Bell Helicopter division. My first years were right in the manufacturing environment. So I remember going I worked in their experimental design team that was based out of their X-Works facility, kind of like Skunk Works or Phantom Works. And we did modifications of aircraft, quick turn projects that needed to be developed, a lot of experimental projects, that kind of thing. And it got me right in the middle of fast turn manufacturing, all localized on site at the time. And over time, that eventually went away, and they didn't have that function eventually in the business. But it was great while we were part of that team, and you could literally take a drawing, walk out to the shop floor, learn from the mechanic that was going to assemble it, or the sheet metal, or the machinist who was going to fabricate it. But that increasingly became a disappearing thing in the big business of aviation. That's why I like the kind of Robinson model, where we can still do that. You can walk out and you can talk to people who make the parts and assemble them later. So that's been quite valuable. My background, really, from that, I got involved in new product development and its core part of my DNA. New products in civil, new products in military. Those all gave me a touch of manufacturing exposure. A lot of working with suppliers. I worked on 2 civil projects that were mostly outsourced manufacturing there, and suppliers all around the world. So traveled to Italy to learn hydraulics there and controls. Traveled to England for fuel bladders and fuel cells, and parts of Europe for pumps and valves and things like that. And in all over the world, there are great manufacturing companies out there. And I think there's a reason why those companies do well in an outsourced model. But I found these strengths here to be unbeatable. We can build a lot of those components on site and for similar costs and better quality. But yeah, my background mostly had been in new products that got me exposed to manufacturing and throughout my career.
What's something you learned, maybe a early lesson that you learned that guides your leadership today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned a little bit about the vulnerability piece. We had a early loss of an aircraft, no fatality in my bell time, and it was the result of people moving very quickly and individually all looking at their space and trying to do the right thing. So it was basically a part was being built that was built quickly out of parts that were available, but it wasn't ultimately what the plan was to use that part in the aircraft. So quickly they got about 80% finished. They packed it all up, put it in stock, and they put a completed item on instead. When they did that, they thought they were doing the right thing. And when it went to stock, it was stocked and then put on an aircraft later with dust caps on it that were protective, right? The type of thing you use to protect a system while it's being built up. And those dust caps ended up dislodging and blocking a fuel line and causing an aircraft to lose the engine. So in that situation, you realize like everybody can do the right thing individually, but if there's no one zooming out and looking at a much larger view of the whole process, you miss the vulnerability that hurts the most. So I think my leadership style, and one of the things I ask my senior leaders in particular to do, is to understand the full process and not just focus on their piece, not just stay within a kind of a lane or a silo. They have to have an understanding of the full picture. And then most cases, when there are functions that require marketing and sales and engineering, it is like all 3 together, all 3 thinking marketing, sales, and engineering together to the extent of the limits of their people. But, you still have to have a vantage point on that. So it tends to run the entire event differently. You're not running a relay race. You're running a 3-legged sack race, it's sort of that kind of thing. And so it makes it a much more tricky thing, and you got to staff your people differently for that. But it is a different type of culture and a different type of expectation.
Now, where does lean manufacturing fit into that?
So I even in my undergrad, we were exposed to lean manufacturing. MIT has a great program on lean that has been at the core of their teaching for 3 decades, probably now. And when I had seen it first, it was actually mostly about fundamentals of every single thing you do can be more lean. You can look at the workspace you're in and be identifying things that both cut your waste time and waste movement. You can have things better positioned so that you're prepared for the tasks of the day. All those type of things are fundamental. And I love that stuff. I think that's where you get massive payoff for almost no cost, really. It's just a thoughtfulness that you do. And then I had experienced it in my big business life where I saw it being twisted too much of you have to re-change everything to get lean. And that change itself is a form of waste. And so one of the struggles and the sort of dichotomies that we see is this sort of splitting of change for lean's sake and lean through deliberate but surgical change. And so that's a different threshold really of how much benefit do you have to get to actually justify the change and all the disruption that comes from that. So in our shop today, we've done a couple of lean projects that were in high value, high pain areas. And I'm happy with that. And I think we'll do more like that and prioritize based on urgent needs, but we won't just overturn all rocks because there's areas that are inefficient, but it's difficult to weigh the disruption of change versus the upside of that incremental small change that might occur. And so I watched too much of that in an environment that was hyper focused on closing projects, creating projects, opening projects, and this whole engine of driving a Six Sigma mentality that they had. Got away from lean. Honestly, it created waste. Like the whole organization became a big cost center and a change center. So when people saw them approaching, it changed from, oh, I'm glad they're here to help. Let's see if we can do this faster together. Oh my gosh, those people are coming. I wonder what they'll do. I wonder how much damage they'll do this time. And I remember one project where back-to-back teams had different opinions about the data. And so they retaped the floor just about every 6 months. And so the layout was different every time. So you really got to be careful about creating an environment of perpetual change. So I have to balance those things. I think lean is super, super critical. And I crave more people coming in the shop that naturally have it. That when you walk into their shop at home, they have shadow boxed their toolbox and they understand where to place things on the wall for sort of proper, easy reach, easy access, that kind of thing. Those are the people that I think I crave the most in my sort of shop leadership, because you don't have to do a lot of pushing for them to think lean and act lean.
So it's a culture that you can refine, but it's also something that's internal to someone's
I
nature.
do think so. I think there is an inherent tendency for some folks to think lean and observe waste.
Yeah.
I do see waste in all of. I walk the floor a lot. I walk the factory all the time. There is a lot of waste here, and like
Mhm.
some people we walk through and they look at it like, gosh, it's so efficient and so practical. Maybe, but there is definitely some opportunity here, and so I think the radar of being able to find waste
Yeah.
is extremely important. It's difficult to teach at a way that even comes close to the best natural people in it. So I think you got to hire some folks that naturally find waste well, and you got to have some really good folks that appreciate the consequences of change and can sort of help provide the friction on, the ones who identify waste really well. And that balances out all the human tendencies that, at least in my experience, has been hard. If you get a runaway train, you get kind of in a spot where you're making change all the time. It's pretty disruptive.
Well, it's got to be nice too, because when you have those employees that are really good at that, they're able to train people like, hey, these are some inefficiencies you need to look out for.
Right.
And then you're starting to build the next generation who, you know,
It can be a culture that's contagious.
yes.
But the best way to do that is, I think, because similar to like, I have a hard time getting my son to clean his room, right? When you have kids, you realize that like that's a type of person that's going to be
Pulling
difficult.
teeth,
Sometimes.
yeah.
So because of that, I watch his struggles with that instinctive thing. And you're not going to win over people by, overwhelming them with lots of change, but you might get them to change just a couple things. So in his case, organizing his bathroom is easier because he doesn't want like his toothbrush mixed with his, where he goes to the bathroom and stuff. And so he thinks about stuff like that is thoughtful about organization. So you seize on the benefits of maybe their personal preferences. And so it's better to evangelize the folks that way
Yeah.
than to just sort of force them to go through change they don't fully understand.
I feel like that can be overwhelming too if you're looking at the big picture instead of like, hey, one little area at a time, and then it.
Yes, and that's definitely a communication challenge amongst the team of how do you go through the different micro view versus the full big picture view. I expect my folks to really understand the full picture, the leadership in particular, but at the working level, that's an impractical expectation. So you need them to stay surgical, understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, but not see so much change that they question the big picture.
Yeah. Well, and also too, you can't have leadership force those changes. So how do you cultivate something from kind of the
I
bottom?
mean, a big part is, first thing is we've got a great culture here where they have not ever encountered the drawbacks of some of these efforts. So as long as we are good stewards of their patience and their interest, right now they're at like generally very receptive mode. So I think that's our big burden is I don't want to ruin that. I want to make sure that the things we change, they feel the positives of that. So, some examples are there's a nexus between efficiency, quality, and injury risk that is it's win-win-win-win.
Yeah.
Everybody gets good. So we're trying to identify things like that we can use to say, let's go do those things first. And that in the end should be a trust builder for all of them. But then if we're not careful, I think we could lose some of the folks' trust if we make change that they don't see the benefit of. And that's why we have to really balance these projects and be thoughtful about which ones in which order. So we're trying to pick our areas where we know we have natural leaders that get it. And that's going to help make it all resonate faster.
Yeah. Build momentum too. And then people are going to be more inclined to, hey, let me work on this. Let me manage this project.
Build your ideas. I had a skip level lunch earlier today and several of the folks we passed as we were going by, they have a lot of ideas. I mean, everyone in their world, once this is the piece that probably the 50 or 60% of the puzzle. Once you show them how to view and find waste, they can find those things. The true naturals get that intuitively. That's the easy part for them. And they actually can master it. And they can find all the hardest things to find, the insidious waste, But I feel like for the bulk of people, we're getting to the point where some of those leaders are really, oh yeah, I understand what you mean now. Movement waste is the easiest one for people. Because I tell people, like, how much should you move these systems across the factory? And their answer is, I never really thought about that. Light bulbs, start to come off. And that movement waste is probably the one that is the easiest to explain to people because they understand it from commuting, right? That is movement waste,
Well, and also with a culture of fail fast, I feel like they start having their own, ideas and they're not afraid to speak on them. And that's important because then It's like no idea is dumb. Just come to
Yeah,
the
you got to
table.
bring that culture up, and
Yeah.
that is tough for a lot of folks. I mean, the historical culture of most companies is not that, where there was a lower tolerance for failure in industries in general.
Mm.
We've worked hard to make sure people understand that, you know, it's most important to tell people when you make a mistake, and that we can all learn from that. Then we get better. It's like the medical field. For a long time, people struggled with the medical field addressing, you know, a fatal outcome in a case.
Hmm.
And then they built a culture around postmortems that had everyone kind of rigorously evaluated, and it changed the entire industry. So we try to have the same approach. And eventually the safety course is a lot of the same culture of that, is trying to drive that in our operators, you know, so that they see failures, see fatal accidents, understand the root causes of that, and then make better choices themselves and share the word.
So this is a dedicated safety course that
It
they
is.
take?
We've been
Okay.
teaching this really for 40 years now, and it used to be taught by the founder and gradually was taken on by others over the years. But it's a factory program that pretty much every R-22 and 44 pilot in the world comes here and takes. There's some exceptions, places that are harder to get a visa to get here, but we are also sending our pilot instructors out to teach in foreign countries as well. So in totality, we've reached tens of thousands of
That's
pilots.
amazing.
Yeah. And it's a lot of thoughtful case study of each fatal accident that represents major examples of things that have caused accidents in the past. Very valuable, and nothing quite like it in the industry.
How does training play a role at Robinson?
I mean, we have several types of training. We absolutely, our primary focus on training has been on training customers and training them how to both operate the aircraft and learn from the things that we see here at the factory. But increasingly, we've been doing a lot more structured employee training. We had never done that before. It was
Mhm.
always on the job training. There was a little bit of training that was like human factors, safety training, but generally it was pretty like broad and limited to, you know, when people first hire on, and then a recurrency of some kind. So now we're trying to do supervisory training and teaching people how to coach and lead and mentor and manage performance, have hard discussions, all those things that define successful cultures when you have big scale and, you know, over the long haul. So I think we're increasingly adding that component, and we really encourage our employees to develop themselves. And like one of the best examples is our pilot training program. A lot of our pilots, a lot of our employees want to fly these aircraft, and so we make it accessible for them to go through ground school. We teach it here, and then we do pilot training with the aircraft, so folks can become pilots within with our support and financial support and aircraft access and all that. And then as a result of that, they have access to the aircraft to use, with some restrictions, of course, but it gives them a flexible way to become an aviator and learn the product. It makes better engineers, makes better salespeople. All that is easy to see. So we do training for things like that too, just employee development.
And that's all done here on site?
One of the best things about it, like the
Yeah.
aircraft we passed earlier, are the yellow ships. A lot of those are used in the training programs, and that's it's an easy decision to make. And it was, you know, in my previous life, big companies, they make the product, and then their lawyers tell them it's too dangerous to fly your employees at this. Like, well, what does that mean? Like, is it? How about for our customers? Is
Yeah.
it too dangerous? It's obviously not too dangerous, but it was this thing of, if you ask a lawyer, a lot of times the answer is no. And I think, unfortunately, big company cultures a lot of times do approach things with a no first mindset. And I think we're trying hard to find a good way to make it a yes culture in
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of cases.
And that makes sense too. It's like you sell it to customers, so your employees should be
It
able
should be a pretty easy decision, but I think it makes the best engineers. I mean, our engineering team, when I designed with my Bell career, several aircraft with a lot of others, but in those, I can't think of a single person that was a pilot on the staff that was designing. Everybody was just an engineer, and you had a couple people who eventually became fixed wing pilots, but none of them are rotary wing pilots. Whereas here on the RD-8, 3/4 of the team, I think, is active pilots or in the training and the flight phase of the pilot training. And the others, I think, were previously pilots. They went through the program years earlier, but have not been able to maintain their currency, so they're not flying anymore. But even that is still good. I mean, they're still a pilot, you know? So I think it is an incredible asset to have aviators that are also engineers, and that makes better product by far.
Absolutely. Final question. Where do you envision Robinson Helicopter by 2030?
2030. All right. So I think about 2075 a lot, because
Okay, that's even better. Yeah.
think like the Chinese, got to be 5 decades out. I think the future of aircraft in general and vertical lift is going to favor our story and our commitment to vertical integration. The technologies will make more of the aircraft We'll make new aircraft sort of designs. And then the drones that we're building now here in Torrance will augment the current product mix, but it'll also work together with the aircraft. So I think, when you look 2050 to 75 out, I suspect we will have a lot of aircraft flying that have no environmental impact. I think we will get to zero emissions. We're doing it with our R66 on the hydrogen fuel cells now. And if the economy grows away, I think there'll be a huge investment in power and electricity for data centers and AI to enable our entire world, modern world. We'll be alongside that because those generation capabilities can generate hydrogen power, liquid hydrogen, and gaseous hydrogen to drive our fuel cell driven R66. So I think it's going to be an incredibly effective way to get to a zero emissions product. It will probably still cost more. It'll probably still have elements that are less performant, so lower range than a jet fuel driven product. We think there's going to be a need for both. And so I think similar to the unmanned story, there'll be manned aircraft, there'll be unmanned aircraft, there'll be jet fuel powered aircraft, there'll be hydrogen powered aircraft. And I think our long-term view is these things will increase in numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
The only thing limiting the number of helicopters in the sky today really is the number of pilots. And that has a direct role in the cost. And cost is a big driver of how many people can afford to fly on a routine helicopter flight. But our job is to make that as affordable as possible. And the way to do that is increased scale, some mix of manned and unmanned, and increased automation that makes the journey to become an aviator easier and more affordable.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, see if I can convince my wife to let me get the pilot.
It's a fantastic way to go, man. And I wish I could do it myself, with my epilepsy blocks that. But I think we see a lot of folks that get the bug late in life and they regret not starting earlier. So
I would love that.
But it's not a cheap profession to get into because the training hour costs are not super cheap. But when you consider, I've seen a lot of folks that get into other hobbies. Golf is a very expensive hobby if you spend a lot on that. Same thing with folks who like to do high-end fishing and stuff. So it's not crazy different than that. So hopefully people pick up the mantle and take it on.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you so
Awesome.
much for the tour
Yeah.
and the time.
Awesome.